Guys, today we'll discuss strength in questions in CR. Now, typically, this is a question type that you come across as one of the first question types in CR, but we're discussing almost at the end. But then I guess you're very comfortable with the basics of what a strength in question is, right? It is very similar to a weakened question. Again, there are a few points that we'll keep in mind. For example, I'm sure you would have gone through the video that you have to keep the conclusion of this argument in mind because that is what you have to strengthen, isn't it? Now, there is a logic behind it. We keep telling you that you don't have to strengthen the premises. Now, what is the logic behind it? Look, premises are already facts, isn't it? You can't strengthen something which is already a fact. So if I say the earth is round, and if you tell me that yes, in case you travel this much of distance, and then if you measure this angle, and then you'll see a little bit of curvature, and that is why you can say that the earth is round, that's not good enough, right? I already know that the earth is round. You're adding absolutely no value by telling me that this is how we can ensure we can find out that it is. So that is why we say that you cannot strengthen the premises. You have to strengthen the conclusion, which is actually the opinion or the hypothesis of the author. By using these premises, the author wants to establish that, and that is what you have to strengthen. So just like in weekend questions, we used to imagine that there's a debate going on, and if you have to weaken, then you are in the opposing team to the author. The author, there's a certain topic that you've been given in a debate, right? There is a certain topic that you have to talk about. So one is for and the other team is against. Let's say the conclusion of the author of the argument is the topic of discussion, and the author is in the for team. So the author is giving you points why this is valid, why he's in favor of the topic, and that is your conclusion. In a weekend question, you're in the opposing team, you're in the against team, so you have to find a point why that the conclusion doesn't work, why it is not so, right? You have to give a point against the conclusion. But in case it's a strength in question, then you are in the same team as the author. The author is giving points in favor of the conclusion. You also have to give a point in favor of the conclusion, but then do keep in mind that you have to give a new point. It can't be a repetition of a point that the author has already given, isn't it? Your teammate has already said it. You can't say the same point. You have to give a new point. And that is why we say that in strength and weakened questions, we're always looking for new information. And that is why we say that you have to strengthen the conclusion of the argument, not the premises. The premises are already facts. There is no strengthening as such, right? But then in case we have things like study and report, etc., we also know that in that case, we can strengthen or weaken the study per se. So, for example, when we say that this is the result of the study found that, for example, taller people have higher BP. This is not a fact given to us. The only fact that is given to us is that the study found that taller people have higher BP based on whatever their sample size, whatever the people who are participating, based on them. This is what the study found out. But is that a fact? Does it have to be true? We really can't say, just that the study found this, right? Now I can strengthen it by saying that the participants of the study were from various different ethnicities, demographies, from various different regions, etc. So it had a very diverse participation. Then it does strengthen the conclusion that taller people have higher BP, right? But I can also weaken it by saying that the sample size was really small and etc. So the study was biased, it had some sampling bias, whatever, right? So there are ways to weaken it as well. So in a strength and weaken question, in case we have a regular argument, the premises cannot be strengthened or weakened. We only have to focus on the conclusion of the argument. In case we are dealing with a study or a research, whatever, and they have found something, like something that they have found, the result, that is not a fact. Yeah, the study has found that we can support or weaken that particular finding by providing additional data. Right? We can question the result of a study, that the result of a study is not given to be a fact to us. So keep that in mind. All right. So these were the very basics of strength and questions, and I'm sure you're really comfortable with them. You would have heard them, more than enough number of times. let's start with questions, because it's easy to tell you don't do this, but then when it comes to actual questions, that is when the issue crops up. That is when we tend to forget these basic points. Yeah. All right. So let me share my screen with you. So Codex Berinensis is a Florentine copy of an ancient Roman medical treatise. So this is a copy of some ancient Roman medical treatise. Right? Is undated, so we don't know when exactly it was written. There is no date on it, but it contains clues to when it was produced. So produced, pretty much written, right? So it has clues, even though it doesn't have a date directly, but it has clues. First 80 pages are by a single copyist, but the remaining, so who's the copyist? The one who's writing it, right? He's copying, he's writing the Codex Berinensis. He's copying from the Roman medical treatise, right? So then the first 80 pages are written by a single copyist, but the remaining 20 pages are by three different copies. Okay, so, so what it tells me is that the codex has 100 pages, 80 are by one guy, he's the first copyist, and then the rest of the 20 pages, they are actually by three different people. So here is your second copyist, the third one, and this is the fourth guy, right? All right, which indicates some significant disruption. Well, makes sense. The first 80 pages were written by one guy, but then copies were changed like every few pages, right? So then suddenly, most likely the copies became unavailable. Like, for example, after 80 pages, the first copies became unavailable. Then after, let's say, another 5, 6 pages, the second one also became unavailable. So a third guy was brought in. After another few pages, he also became unavailable. And finally, it was completed by a fourth guy. So it shows some significant disruption, that something was making them unavailable, very, very quickly. Okay, now since a letter in handwriting identified as that of the fourth copyist, so this guy, there is a letter that is found in this guy's handwriting. It mentions a plague that killed many people in Florence in 1148. So this letter, it mentions a plague that killed many people in 1148. Codex Berinensis was probably produced in that year. All right. So, Codex Berinensis was probably produced in that year. This is the hypothesis, the conclusion of the author, right? This is what he wants to tell you. By giving you all this particular data, this is what he wants to say, that this codex was probably produced in that year, in 1148. Now, why is that? How is he matching up that data? Because he says that there is some significant disruption, because a lot of copies were involved over a very short time, which means that there's a disruption. And we got a letter from this guy that we found a letter from this guy which says that there was a plague in 1148. So there was a major disruption that happened in 1148. And of course, since the letter was written by this guy, so most likely, it happened in 1100s only, right? Because he is the one, over the lifespan of one individual, he's the one who wrote a few pages of the codex as well, and he's the one who wrote the letter also. And he does mention a plague that happened in 1148, so perhaps it happened in his lifespan. Now, agreed that there are a lot of perhaps here. Yeah, we are hypothesizing a lot. We don't really have any data to infer what we have inferred. We are just connecting the dots in the best way possible to give us some information. And that is why this is just a hypothesis. We can strengthen or weaken it by giving a lot of data, right? Okay. Now, which of the following, if true, most strongly supports the hypothesis that Codex Berinensis was produced in 1148? All right, now we have to support this, right? Strengthen this. Option A, other than Codex Berinensis, there are no known samples of the handwriting of the first three copies. So we're saying that we don't have any other samples of these guys, of their handwriting. We don't have any letters or any other books or whatever from these three guys. Now, is that supporting that codex was written 1148? No, option A is only telling me that there is lack of data, that we don't know anything about we don't have any information about the first three guys, about these three copies, right? So this is only telling us that there is a lack of data, which cannot support that Codex was produced in 1148. It doesn't mention anything. We have nothing connecting Codex to 1148. So then this cannot be the answer. It doesn't strengthen our conclusion. Look at option B. According to the account by the fourth copyist, the plague went on for 10 months. So we're saying that this plague that happened in 1148, it went on for 10 months. Now, how does that matter? Now, again, the duration of the plague, whether it was for 2 months or 5 months or 10 months or 12 months, is irrelevant. We know that the plague happened in 1148, but how long it lasted doesn't matter, right? Even if it happened for, let's say, just 2 months. So it could have affected the first person, then the second person, then the third person very quickly within those 2 months also. Even if it had happened for just 15 days, it could have still affected, because we're not talking about too many pages. We're just talking about a few pages, right? Over 20 pages, 3 copies were changed, right? All right. So then the duration of the plague, as such, it doesn't matter at all, right? It doesn't bother us. It doesn't strengthen or weaken or do anything. It doesn't tell us anything about, doesn't basically link Codex to 1148 in any way, right? A. A scribe would be able to copy a page of text the size and style of Codex Berinensis in a day. So they're saying that per one page could be written in one day. So if someone was focused on doing this every day, perhaps 100 pages could have been written in 100 days. But then how does it tell us that Codex was written in 1148? How does it support that? If it were written in 1200, then also one page would have taken one day. If it were written in 1100, then also one page would have taken one day, right? Doesn't add any value. All right. This is also not correct. There was only one outbreak of plague in Florence in the 1100s. Now, this is interesting, and people generally like to say that this is not strong enough to be a strengthener. But hey, when there are a lot of possibilities, right? A lot of possibilities exist. The codex would have been written in any of the years, but most likely somewhere in the 1100s only, because again, the fourth copies, you know, or maybe it could have been written later on also. Why not? It could have even been written in, for example, 1200, and the copies could have written that letter. He would have known about the plague that happened in 1148, isn't it? So then it is possible that codex could have been written over whatever, a couple of centuries or even later. We don't know. The fourth copies could have been writing about the plague at any time. Doesn't matter. The letter could have been written any time later. He just mentions the plague that happened in 1148. But our purpose is to strengthen. Our purpose, please remember, our purpose is not to establish the conclusion, right? It will be very hard to establish this conclusion. All we have to do is strengthen. So we have to provide some additional data that makes it more likely, even if slightly more likely, but it just makes it more likely that the conclusion is true, that this is actually what did happen. So when I say that there was only one outbreak of plague in 1100s, I am making it more likely that 1148 was the plague, which was the disruption, the significant disruption that we're talking about here. Just making it more likely. It is certainly possible that the significant disruption was, let's say, a volcanic eruption. Don't know, right? It is certainly possible. It had nothing to do with the plagues at all. But out of the various types of significant disruptions that we can have that happened in 1100s, or maybe a little later also, doesn't matter, we have eliminated one possible other disruption, that is some other plague. We are saying it was not some other plague for sure that was the disruption, right? So then there was no other plague. So then it is possible, now it is a little more possible that this plague of 1148 was the one which was the significant disruption. And that is what we require from our strength in questions. We require that they make the conclusion a little more probable. That's it. That's all. Okay. Okay. Let's look at E. The number of pages of Codex Berinensis produced by a single scribe becomes smaller with each successive change of copies. So here they're saying that out of these 20 pages, let's say 10 pages was written by the second guy, then 8 pages were written by the third guy, and then only 2 pages were written by the fourth guy. That is, the number of pages produced by a single scribe became smaller with each successive change of copies. So the next copies wrote fewer pages than before, than the previous copies. All right, that's fine, doesn't matter. Again, doesn't link Codex to 1148 in any particular way. It doesn't tell us that 1148 plague could have been the significant disruption. It doesn't, it's pretty much out of scope for us. It doesn't really matter. Just a few days. I mean, it could have been even 2, 8, 10. Even then, it wouldn't matter. In our scheme of things, this also would have had exactly the same impact, right? So this also is not strengthening our conclusion. Hence, our option D is the one which is our strengthening. So one question that we had over here yesterday was that it is possible that the letter was written in 1200 and, so then how can we say that in 1148 was when Codex was written? Again, look, it doesn't matter. As I'm saying, it is certainly possible that the letter was written in 1200. It's all right. The only thing that D does is make it a little more likely. For example, when I say that it shows that there was significant disruption, there are, let's say, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, so many different factors possible, so many different disruptions possible, which happened while Codex was getting produced, right? I have picked up one of them and I have said that it was the plague of 1148 based on some random facts that I have. I'm saying this is the plague of 1148. Now, when I say that there was, let's say E is one of the things, could be another plague in the same century. When I say there was no other plague in the same century, I'm just cancelling off this. There are all these possibilities as well present, doesn't matter. Just that now my probability of this, if I just think of mathematics, I think of probability. By cancelling this out, now my probability of this being the answer has increased slightly, but it has increased, and that is why it is the answer. Right?